My wife, my wife Allie is a kindergarten teacher. If you don't know, like an incredible kindergarten teacher. She's also an incredible mom and an incredible wife. But the teacher part is important because that's the context, loosely, that got me thinking about what I wanted to talk about today. We have a unique schedule. We've got 3 kids under 5, and when it's summertime, everyone is home. Like, everyone. I love being involved. It's, like, the best part. I love summertime with everyone being home. I get to take breaks from work, for lunch times, but with a baby and a 2-year-old who decided this summer to find they're terrible, um, I was involved a lot more, and with, 3 kids under 5, it seems that, like, every single one of my, summers recently have had to be very involved, which I love doing. Let me make sure that that is very clear. This is not a complaint on my summer schedule. It is just the setup for, the fact that my work schedule gets choppier in the summer. It's the beauty of being a remote worker, getting to do my time at any time I want during the day as long as I'm continuing to get my work done. But what that means is I stay very focused on the most important tasks when I am at my desk because I know I've only got a couple of good work chunks throughout a day. But this week marks the first week that everyone is back at school. My wife and our oldest are back at school. She's in kindergarten this year. And I drop the 2 youngest off at my mother in law's. And I have what feels like, after getting back home, nothing but time. Like, the whole day is ahead of me. And for the first week, you get back that first day, and it it feels crazy. Like, I get an entire week of summer work done in, like, the first day or 2. But as August changes to September and September changes to October, that feeling changes. My dedication to the most important tasks fade, with all the time that I have, and I'm still doing a lot of work, but not all of it is focused in the same way that it is over the summer. And last summer, I heard a saying that really kind of struck a chord with this thought: "You're just a squirrel prying at rocks." That's what we're going to talk about today. I'm Will King, and this is episode 2 of Strong Opinions Weekly Held. Let's do it! Okay. What does that mean? I just, like, threw that in there at the end. Squirrel prying at rocks. Uh, if you haven't heard this one before, when a squirrel is prying, what are they trying to do? They're trying to find food. Actually, Allie and I, a couple weeks ago, saw this squirrel with the longest tail I think I've ever seen. Like, it was truly absurd how long the tail was. And it was running around the yard picking up acorns and prying them open and then just shoving it in its little mouth and then going on to the next one. So I'm sure you figured it out that, when the rest of the saying goes on to say you're just a squirrel prying at rocks hoping to find nuts. The idea here is the futility of the squirrel who's doing all of this work prying at a rock when there's nothing to find. So, let me tell you, I have pried at a lot of rocks. Honestly, a truly staggering amount looking back. And this saying is framed as a negative a lot of times, but there were also times in my life where prying at rocks was valuable. So today, let's dig into two ways that you can be prying at rocks. One that is not always, like, it's always futile in the end, in the sense that, like, you never find what you were looking for during doing the task. Um, but there's 2 different ways that you can go about it, where one provides value for you and the other one doesn't, and we need to avoid it, um, from my experience. So the first one we're going to dig into is the one that can sometimes provide value. So there's this time when you can be prying at rocks where you're unaware that that's what you're doing. You think that you're doing something that you're going to find food out of, that you're going to find success or, like, a result out of, and you're going at it just going to town on that rock, but uh, thinking it's a nut the whole time, but it's not. And the times that I did this, I genuinely believed that what I had in my hands was a nut, only to discover that it was a rock. Now, I can think of a few examples where this was the case where I still found value from it, even though it didn't turn out the way that I expected it to. Um, the value that I found from doing this was tangentially great as well. So the first the first of these, there's like I will say there's a few different like topics um, that kind of fall under this. So one of them is building a tool that nobody wants. So this is this is the one that I've run into more times than I care to count. But as a builder, this is definitely the most common rock that I, and I'm going to assume a lot of you, fall for. It's always disappointing when you realize that you found a rock, but um, let me share some of like the valuable things that I got out of finding rocks when trying to build something that ended up nobody wanted. So one, I got better at building products, and I also got better at figuring out when something was a rock sooner. So and one example that I'll share with this is there was this my very first JavaScript library that I wrote, and it was called Salad Bar. And I was writing this back when I first started development. I worked in a WordPress. Uh, we were an educational company called Skill Crush, and everything we wrote was in vanilla JavaScript. And I was just getting so tired of trying to go and do DOM access manually. And so what I wrote was a functional. I'd gotten super down the functional rabbit hole, and so I wrote a functional library for how to use a bunch of functional helpers to pull DOM elements out, um, run operations on those elements, all in a way that was a very like functional approach. It was kind of it was like Alpine before there was Alpine, and roughly like a million times worse. So, needless to say, I was the only one that enjoyed using it. And after releasing it, making a super fun logo for it, I realized that what I was holding was a rock. But for me, this was like huge. This was like a huge learning experience. I was able to think through APIs for the first time in the sense that like other people would be using it. I was the only like developer at the time at the company, so I was writing it and I was using it, and so everything that I wrote made sense to me. But when I tried to write it for external consumption, I had to think through API design that anyone could understand. Now, I probably would have learned a lot more if people used it and learned the ways in which that still wasn't successful in my API design, but it was definitely like this mindset that I then got into, which was like, how would others use this? Like, what is the right way to present the API for something that I'm writing? Um, and the other one was how to document and communicate a mental model around writing code. So it's not enough to just say like, "Hey, here's the API, use it for this library," because people needed to be convinced why they needed this and like why did I go take the approach that I did and what the value was in doing that. So I got a lot of experience thinking through like, well, why would I do it this way? What's the value in it? What are the pros? What are the cons? And why do I think the pros outweigh the cons? But that was just one of many times that I pried at rocks. The other ones all taught me different things. I would do something that would really level up my design ability. That actually happened this year. Um, I applied for a job role for Tailwind, and applying for the job made me think, wow, have I really got this influx of like imposter syndrome, which really sent me down this rabbit hole of getting better at design. I redesigned my homepage, my whole website, did a lot of work doing that I didn't end up getting the job, but I got a lot of personal improvement by trying to pry. So I would actually owe my current career path to prying at a rock because I had this podcast. Surprise, had another one before this one. Um, that was about the Elm front end language. Surprise again, functional. If you don't see a trend there, I've since then moved away, but I'm not going to digress now. But I did this whole season interviewing people from the Elm community about text editors because I was wanting to build a text editor in Elm, and that was a whole lot of fun. I learned a whole lot, built a lot of connections and relationships from that, even though I didn't continue on with the podcast. It wasn't like the podcast brought me some like incredible amount of podcast related success or anything. But the job that I got after working at the WordPress company um, only came for two reasons. One, because I did the podcast. They heard about the podcast and they were like, wow, like he has a lot of passion and dedication to learning something that is not part of his current role. And he seems to be very knowledgeable about it. That got them interested in me. That set me apart from other people that could take the role. The other one is that um, my current role is in WordPress, but I had started doing a bunch of products and projects in React that went nowhere. Like all of them, all of them went nowhere. But through that process, I learned React. I learned that whole environment and got into that community. And the next job, which was a React job, was only possible because I now had all this knowledge from building things that didn't work. So there's this whole category of things that you can learn from prying at rocks when you're doing it, not aware that what you are prying at is a rock. I wrote 3 bullet points down that I think kind of capture a lot of this, which is one, you learn how to identify rocks sooner. I don't spend as much time on things that are going nowhere as I did before because I can identify sometimes before I start whether what I'm going to work on is worth working on it or not. And I can make a decision of, okay, do I want to do this to learn something? So now like uh my like decision making formula is different. I'm not going at it and then disappointed on the other end of it because I didn't achieve what I thought I would. I can categorize those as like, okay, this isn't because I think it's going to find success in this way. I will find success by like learning something new, maybe meeting some new people by building something fun or something cool. So you identify rocks sooner. 2, you learn skills that can only come from getting in reps. Reps and skills is like a whole topic that I'm sure I will expound upon a lot more in future episodes of this, but you can only master a skill through repetition of doing it. There's no amount of reading about something or studying something that will make you master it. You can only find sharp edges and gaps in your knowledge by trying to apply the theory that you have been studying and learning. So that a lot of times comes at in the form of prying at rocks. You get reps and you level up those skills and get better at them. Then the final one, which was kind of like a side note as part of like the podcast path story that I told earlier, was that you build connections and relationships. Sharing what you're doing, even if it leads nowhere from a success perspective, financially, um, just by sharing things that you're doing and being public with that and working on things that are fun or cool, and you find connections and relationships through that process. Um, it's like my favorite part of building things and working on things is that process of like building a network, building relationships. My career, a lot of the fun projects and exciting things that have found success in my career came from working on something that was not successful or was never going to be successful, but was interesting and fun and caught attention of people that allowed me to jump into projects and roles that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So that kind of wraps up this topic of like unaware prying at rocks that can be valuable at times because you learn something from it and you weren't intentionally doing it. which leads us to the other type of prying at rocks that is not valuable, and that is a lot of times something that you can get sucked down into the bog of, which is when you know that you're prying on a rock. Um, when we're prying on rocks and we know that what we're doing is a rock, a lot of times we will make excuses to ourselves. We will tell ourselves that this isn't a rock. This is a big old juicy nut. This is valuable. This is something that is important to be worked on. I have to do this. When a lot of times what's happening is like I'm telling myself, well, this is valuable to avoid this other difficult thing. Like I need to get these are oh, I could get these done quick. Let me do these three things. And this goes back to how August turns into September and turns into October, where I didn't have a lot of time. And so I knew I had to focus on the important things, even if they were hard things. But the more time that I had to work on things, the easier it was to keep doing things, to be busy, but not to be working on the important things, to pry on rocks, as it were, to waste my time away doing things that I knew were not the most important thing to be working on. They were not even the thing that was some of these other items where it's like, oh yeah, like I'll learn something from this, or I'll like get reps in a new skill and build connections and relationships. Like no, these are like these are like the tasks of like I think a lot of bootstrappers, people building products will get this, where you know that the app that you're building has this pain point with maybe it's like activation or onboarding, and you know that like the problem is they just don't get understand X. So what you really need to do is you need to spend time planning, thinking, designing, uh, developing on this area of the app. But that's really hard. Like I don't understand why people don't get it. I might need to talk to users to understand that. I don't really want to talk to people. Oh, but like this, like people really wanted dark mode. Sorry, I had to drop that one in there. Or like invoices, like billing, things that seem valuable but are not actually valuable to the problem at hand. There is an important thing that you could be working on, but instead of working on the important thing, what you're doing is going up and gathering up all these little rocks, these things that feel valuable, putting them in your little bag of valuable items, and then that bag is going to sink you and sink your product because you're holding a bag of rocks instead of a bag of actually valuable things that you've spent time on and collected. So that's the idea. You pry at rocks, you waste time, and when you're not aware of it, sometimes you're not doing it on purpose, and it may waste some time, but it can sharpen your skills. It can help you learn to identify rocks sooner because you weren't aware of what it looked like in the first place. And at times you can build connections and relationships by working on projects that may not have any long-term financial value directly from them. But then there's the flip side of the coin, where you know what you're doing. You know that there's an important thing that you're working on. And as August turns into September and September turns into October, the more time that you have, the easier it is to try and avoid the important things. It takes discipline, and that's not always easy. You don't always feel like being disciplined. And like sometimes just go pry at some rocks. Like if you need to go pry at a rock, go pry at a rock. Sometimes it's okay. But when you realize you've only been prying at rocks and you've got no food and winter comes, you're going to be in trouble. So that's the extent that I'm going to push this metaphor, this idea. But I want to hear your thoughts about it. I'd love to hear stories of times that you've pried at rocks. I'd love to hear of the times that they turned out great and the times that they might not have, and you realize you're just wasting time. But there are times out there